All right, so same as I did the lactic acid system, I'm going to do the aerobic system this way with sort of like the details as to how it works, and then I'll rub this off and give you the particulars on the next screen. So the aerobic system, as the name implies, it is an aerobic energy system, not anaerobic. So this time it uses oxygen for energy, okay? So the aerobic system can use carbohydrates stored as glucose. It can use fats stored as lipids in the body, and life or death situations, proteins, broken down from amino acids, to resynthesize ATP, okay? This is the system that I am currently using. It's probably the system that you're currently using watching this video, okay? Most of the time in the day, you are going to be using your aerobic energy system. So it is used at rest or very low intensity activities, okay? So think walking, think like marathon running, not that that's super low intensity, but for fit people, that's low intensity. For me, bad. Anyway, so when we're at rest or when we're doing something very, very, very low intensity, okay, you're going to use fats, okay, through a process called aerobic lipolysis. So it takes the fats in your bloodstream, and then if it needs to free them from your body, it will, okay, and then it converts that to resynthesize ATP. So that's a good thing, right? But in saying that, fat is very energy dense, okay? So like 1 gram of fat nutritionally contains like 9 calories. So while it's like, oh, I can go for a walk and I can just burn fat. Yeah, well, that's true, but you're not actually needing that much to power your walk, okay? So a little bit misnomer, but anyway, we'll get to that later in the course anyway. At moderate intensities, so like think heart rate, 65%, upwards, okay? We're going to mainly be using glucose, all right, through a process called aerobic glycolysis, okay? It's not anaerobic, so this time it's aerobic glycolysis, so breaking down glucose for energy using oxygen. And as I stated, protein is very, very rarely used unless the other two sources become either exhausted or the systems to convert these fuels into ATP have become exhausted, okay? So that at which point you'll start to use protein. Now, there are 2 other parts to this. So other than breaking down glucose or fats through lipolysis or glycolysis, we have these other 2 systems that run at the same time. We've got the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. I've tried to summarize this as best as possible because you don't really need to know it in depth, but you may get a question on it. So the Krebs cycle, very simply, okay, we know that from the previous system that when we're breaking down ATP, okay, the body will send pyruvate, okay, to buffer the system, the cells. However, the pyruvate sent to buffer the muscles in the aerobic system is really not required because oxygen is there instead as a buffer and to remove hydrogen and whatever, but we'll get to the hydrogen bit in a minute. So therefore, the pyruvate can be used to resynthesize more ATP by converting into a product called acetyl-CoA, all right? So think in the previous system, we used the pyruvate and the hydrogen got together and they made lactate. Well, this time the pyruvate goes there, but it doesn't need to bond because there's no sort of, the hydrogen is not being built up in the system. So therefore the body goes, oh, okay, I've got this pyruvate, I'm gonna convert it into something called acetyl-CoA, and then I can make more ATP from that, right? So it's good, okay? Now, the hydrogen's being shuttled out of the muscles because the process is a lot slower, so it doesn't build up like it does in the alactic acid system. So therefore, the hydrogen, not needing to be bound to pyruvate, undergoes another complex process, and it creates even more ATP, okay? And then after that process is done, it then converts into water, and you either breathe it out or sweat it out, okay? Which is why when you exercise, you breathe harder and, well, not the only reason, but one of the reasons why you breathe harder, and also one of the reasons why you start sweating, okay? Not the only reason, but anyway, off topic. So yeah, you just need to know that the Krebs cycle exists, and the Krebs cycle is just converting pyruvate to acetyl-CoA to make more ATP. And the electron transport chain cycle exists, and that is using the hydrogen to create more ATP, all right? These things only occur in the aerobic energy system, all right? And so the aerobic energy system really has 3 different ways of making ATP, either from glycolysis or lipolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain, okay? All right, so our particulars for the aerobic system, all right? We know that our source of fuel is that we're mainly going to be using carbohydrates at our, moderate intensity activities, and we're mainly going to be using fats at our lower intensity activities. So I've got this like rough 65% of our maximum heart rate and above is going to be predominantly carbohydrates, and 65% and below is going to be predominantly lipids. The efficiency of this system, though, is slow, okay? Unlike the ATP, PC, and the lactic acid system, which can produce resynthesize ATP pretty quickly, this takes a while. This is a long system, but it's always running, okay? So think of it like, like a really old diesel car that you can just fill up and its top speed is like 40 kilometers per hour, but it can drive all the way from here to Townsville on one tank of fuel, as opposed to like a Porsche that needs to refuel, about 10 times between here and Townsville, but it will get there quick. So the duration of the system is indefinite because you are always using your aerobic system to create ATP as long as you are alive, okay? However, in the context of sport and exercise, the process of aerobic glycolysis takes about 60 seconds to kick in before it starts going, okay? And then once it's going, it can keep creating sustained ATP for upwards of about 2 hours until like athletes experience the hitting the wall effect, which is basically all of their glycogen has been depleted in the body, all right? Now, athletes try and minimize this effect by constantly having glucose through their events. That's why you see like triathletes and marathon runners and cyclists, and they've got little glucogels and Powerades and things like that. So what they're actually trying to do during exercise is replenish the glucose that they're currently using so that they can extend their moderate activities beyond 2 hours. The intensity of the system is low to moderate. We've been through that already. The recovery of the system. So you can obviously the whole time the system's recovering, especially if you are like taking glucose during your activity, but to fully replenish the system takes about 24 hours, okay? Depending on the level of exhaustion, all right? So someone who ran like a 42-kilometer marathon, they're going to need 24 hours to recover the system. They'll probably need more than 24 hours to recover other parts of their body, but we're not talking about that today. We're just talking about the energy itself. And then finally, the cause of fatigue in the system is the depletion of fuel sources, all right? So your body's going to prioritize, providing you're working in a moderate intensity, your body's going to prioritize glucose first. And then if you hit the wall, okay, you can actually start to do that aerobic lipolysis for ATP. But because that process takes a lot longer to resynthesize ATP, you naturally slow down, okay? So if you think about a marathon runner, okay, let's say they're running for 3 hours and they have no glucose at all during their event. And so for 2 hours, they're able to run at a constant speed of about 10 kilometers per hour. And then at about the 2 hour mark, they've depleted their glycogen stores and they haven't been resupplying glycogen. So then they switch to aerobic lipolysis. But now, instead of being able to run at about 10 kilometers per hour, they've got to go down to about 8 kilometers per hour. Okay, that's a good indication of, well, not a good indication, but that's a good way of like showing you how the body can still use fats to create energy in the aerobic system, but it takes a lot longer. So the efficiency is way, way, way down now, and therefore they have to slow down. Yeah. Okay. One last thing to cover in this video. Okay. So at the very, very start of this video, I mentioned that all of the energy systems are always being used. They're always ready. You don't use one then the other then the other. It doesn't work like 1, 2, 3, okay? So for example, actually, I'll just write it up. Okay, so as I was saying, like for example, if you're a soccer player, okay, or a football player, over the course of a 90-minute match, this is like a rough breakdown. Like this is obviously isn't hard and fast, but this gives you a rough idea of the energy systems that would be used to sustain them for that 90 minutes. So they'd use the ATP PC system like 50% of the time. So I think every time they kick a ball, every time they sprint, every time they tackle, all that kind of stuff is ATP, PC. All right. Then they've got their lactic acid system. So like 20% of the time. So think like a long line sprints or running pretty hard, but not like maximum to get into position. And then the other 30% of the time, they're just using their aerobic system because they're either at a moderate to low intensity, they're either walking around the pitch or jogging around the pitch when the ball's not near them, etc. Okay? So I've drawn this picture. This is to sort of demonstrate to you the system contribution if I was getting chased by a really, really nasty dog, okay? The dog's chasing me for 2 hours. I don't know why, but you know, he really, really wants to eat me, okay? So I start here and I just start running. And I literally just tell myself, I'm just gonna keep running as fast as I can for as long as I can, okay? That's obviously not, that doesn't happen in a sport. There's not a particular sport where you just run as fast as you can for as long as you can and you end up doing 2 hours. Like a marathon runner who runs for 2 hours doesn't start off as fast as they can. They sort of, they pace themselves throughout. Anyway, so imagine I start here, we all start here, we stand up and we run. We run as fast as we can for as long as we can. So instantly our ATP stores, so this is the percentage of system contribution to provide energy. The ATP stores in our muscles are the first thing to be used, okay? Because we don't need to resynthesize ATP until we've used some ATP. Makes sense, all right? And then those stores in our muscles, they're kind of depleted even before the 10-second mark. So like 3, 4, 5 seconds, okay? We've used our ATP stores, all right? Because we're sprinting. Remember, we're running as fast as we can. And so instantly what happens is the ATP-PC system, which is this line here, it kicks in, okay? And it's like, it'll meet it at about halfway and go, okay, I need to create some ATP because we are going as hard as we can and I can use my phosphocreatine to do that. But then we know that after about 10 seconds, our phosphocreatine stores are deplenished, all right? So we don't just stop. So what happens is that eventually, you know, at about this 10-second mark, the lactic acid system picks up the slack and it's like, okay, well, I can start to use anaerobic glycolysis to produce some energy. And it will do that, you know, and it can go for like upwards of, 3 minutes. I probably should make that 3 minutes if we were going sub-maximal, okay? All right. So lactic acid system is burning, okay? And then I've run out of PC stores in my muscles and my lactic acid system has created too much hydrogen, okay? And I've got that burning sensation, so my body, the muscular contractions aren't going to contract anymore as hard as I want them to, so I slow down, okay? And when I slow down and that system kicks off, then the aerobic system, which has sort of been running pretty low this whole time, picks up the slack for energy. And then I will continue to use my aerobic system until those stores are depleted, all right? The other interesting thing to note here on this graph is the overall performance of the individual, okay? So you can see up here when they've got stored energy, you're able to go, bam, you're able to work at 100% of your energy. And then as we start to incorporate the other systems, which are slower in resynthesizing ATP, our performance goes down, all right? Which is why you can't sprint for 2 hours straight, all right? Due to the energy system, due to performance, etc. Okay, and that is the end of our video on energy systems. Thanks.